Part of our mission at Gluten-Free Society is to create and provide healthy resources for those with celiac disease and gluten sensitivity. Keyword, healthy resource, right? What makes Warrior Bread different from other gluten-free breads? For one, it tastes fantastic. No cardboard texture, no sharpness cutting the roof of your mouth. Warrior Bread has the perfect texture and consistency. But don't take my word for it. Check out some of our customer reviews. Warrior Bread is gluten-free, grain-free, keto-friendly, and paleo-friendly. It is nutrient-dense, organic, and it only has 6 hand-selected ingredients. It is easy to make and requires minimal kitchen time. And to prevent the risk of cross-contamination, this mix is produced in a certified gluten-free as well as peanut-free facility. And because I wanted to make it even better, I hired a professional chef to create more ways for you to enjoy it. Not only can you make fantastic gluten-free bread, when you buy Warrior Bread mix, I will send you the recipes to make lemon bars, pizza, eggs Benedict, chocolate cake, cinnamon rolls, chicken and dumplings, and much, much more. Why are other gluten-free bread a bad idea? These companies in the gluten-free food industry have a dark secret they will never tell you about. 92% of gluten-free diets fail to result in improvement of inflammation. Why? The gluten-free Hey everybody, welcome to the Glutenology Masterclass live question and answer session. I really hope you've enjoyed the first 4 modules to this point. We're at, through module 4, and I know I've thrown a lot of information at you all in just a very short period of time. So we wanted to break this interim up with maybe helping you get to some of the specific questions that you might have, knowing that we've got a lot more information we're going to be throwing at you in the next week. But we're going to take those questions tonight. Some of you have already submitted some questions, but those of you watching now, if you've got specific questions, and I really want to try to keep it on topic with the information from the first 4 modules. So if you've got esoteric questions just about general health, try to save those for another time maybe, but we want to know about your gluten-related questions so that we can stay on target for those of you who are just trying to navigate this diet. Maybe you're new to it, maybe you're not quite sure on what to do. I also want to encourage any of you, if you're not already subscribed, to subscribe to our YouTube channel where we publish new information on a weekly basis for you. We do Monday live Q&As every week just for free, just to help people navigate the realm of natural health, nutrition, and fitness. So make sure you subscribe if you want to keep getting great information like what you're getting in this Glutenology Masterclass. So now without further ado, let's just jump into some of your questions. And again, if you have questions, go ahead and start typing those into the feed or typing those into your question and answer box there. So Judy asks, I'm full of questions. I haven't found the answer to this one. Does gluten cause juvenile osteoarthritis or early osteoarthritis in children? What about adult osteoarthritis? Something has to cause the inflammation besides wear and tear. So it's a great question, Judy, and the answer is think of osteoarthritis, whether it's juvenile or whether it's adult onset, is not just wear and tear. It's a multitude of different factors. Can gluten be or play a role in that? It absolutely can. We see a lot of youngsters who are competitive athletes who do have wear and tear because of that competition level of sport that they're in. But they also, in many cases, don't heal. So their body starts to break down. They're very young. They won't heal. And when we change their diet, when we take them gluten-free, they actually start healing again. So we know it plays a role in wear and tear types of arthritis, both juvenile as well as adult onset. So yes, the answer is absolutely gluten can play a role in that. Let's see, what else do we have here? So Bob, let's just see, this is really long. Let's get to the bulk of the question here. My question is, what is the most subtle symptom of any weakening of the tight junctions of the intestinal lining or of any gluten sensitivity? Subtle, so if you're in great health and you're doing things, really, really well, and you're trying to ascertain whether or not you might have a leaky gut issue, some of the earliest onset symptoms that I see in my patients and in my clients that come to my clinic, number one, we'll actually see joint pain. So like, I know it sounds kind of odd, but that's one of the premises for why I wrote the book, No Grain, No Pain. We see joint pain as a very common manifestation of leaky gut, even in some of its earlier stages. One of the reasons why is when the gut is leaking, there's a bacterial endotoxin that leaks into the bloodstream that can mimic cartilage. And so the immune system will actually start to attack the cartilage because it believes that it is actually a bacterial toxin that's being produced. Again, these bacterial toxins typically don't leak across into the blood unless there is a leaky gut. So joint pain is a very common symptom. Another one is brain fog. So just very early onset is brain fog or deterioration of your memory or your cognitive function. So those are two very common ones. Now, if you want to do some lab testing that might be able to pick up on a little bit earlier in terms of leaky gut, there's a number of different types of labs that can detect kind of the presence of leaky gut, although all of them are not 100% accurate, but one of them can actually show you a little bit earlier of an onset, and that's an antibody test to a compound called LPS, lipopolysaccharides. Again, LPS are these bacterial toxins, and so what happens in the gut is they leak through. So if you've got, the GI tract lining here, and so you've got the cells that line the GI tract, and so this is the barrier, right? But if we get a breakage or a leak coming through, so the cells are breached in a sense, they're not connected, right? We can get leaks. And so this is your bloodstream on the other side. So one of the things that leaks through is you have bacteria that live in your gut, and they basically poop out a compound called LPS. And that LPS leaks across into your blood, and then you will see IgA antibodies against LPS. And that's a test that can be run. It's a simple blood test you can ask your doctor to run, and it can be an earlier indicator that you have a leaky gut, even if you feel good, even if you're healthy. So great question. Which grains or pseudograins are gluten-free? How does quinoa rate on the gluten-free scale? So all grains contain gluten, Linda, so what I would encourage you to do tonight, and make sure you do it tonight because you still have access to Module 1, which is a very deep dive into what gluten is. Very scientific, very techy, but in my opinion, it's the most important module in the entire class to watch, because if you miss that one, you miss the in-depth meaning of so much of the other things that I discussed. So by default, that question, I can tell you doesn't look like you've watched Module 1 just by the nature of that question. All grains have gluten. Now, pseudograins are different. They're technically not grains. They don't really have gluten in them, although they can be cross-contaminated with gluten. But your question was specifically about quinoa. And quinoa, which is a pseudo cereal, has gluten mimicry. It doesn't contain gluten, but it contains a couple of different proteins that can mimic gluten. And as it's mimicking gluten, many people react to it. So that's one of the dangers if you're going on a gluten-free diet, but you're replacing a lot of your traditional gluten-containing grains with quinoa instead. Many people find that that's a mistake and that they don't do well, and that quinoa can actually damage them due to that mimicry. And there have been a couple of studies that actually show that. And I talk more about that in Module 8. So if we haven't gotten to Module 8 yet, but I do a deeper dive on quinoa and some of the other gluten mimickers in Module 8. Let's see, Kathleen is asking, for gluten sensitivity, is it still safe to eat certified organic, non-GMO, gluten-free grains such as sorghum, white, and brown rice? No, it's not, because remember, it doesn't matter how certified they are. The FDA's definition of gluten, and this is it's all industrialized countries in the world today. They define gluten incorrectly, and that's one of the reasons why I did this master class, because the definition needs to change. The definition is wrong. Gluten is not one protein. Gluten is a family of proteins, right? So it's as a family of proteins, it's found in rice. You have orzo in rice. You've got gluten that's in sorghum. You've got gluten in corn. You've got gluten in spelt and wheat, barley, rye, oats, etc. So it doesn't matter if the product says gluten-free, because the FDA and other countries define gluten equals wheat, barley, and rye. Specifically, gluten equals the gliadin, which is a type of gluten found in wheat, barley, and rye. Sometimes you'll hear them talk about oats, but there's a few nuances with oats, but the technical definition on food labeling is this. If you see the term gluten-free, what they're really saying is that it's gliadin-free, but it's not gluten-free because gliadin is one type of gluten, but there are more types of gluten than just gliadin. And so again, I do kind of an intrinsic dive on that in Module 1. So if you haven't fully watched that, or if maybe you watched it once, but it's one of the heavier modules to watch because there's so much science in it, go back and rewatch it. It'll stick if you watch it a couple of times a little bit better. But those other grains, it doesn't matter that they're certified and that they're calling them gluten-free and they're labeling them certified organic. They still contain gluten and they still have the potential to damage you. Let's see here. Can gluten cause tinnitus? Diane wants to know. Yes, it can. As a matter of fact, my esteemed colleagues in the UK, particularly Dr. Marios Hadjivassiliou and his group, are researching gluten as a neurotoxin, and one of the conditions that they're finding is gluten can actually cause tinnitus. It can cause vertigo as well, dizziness and ringing of the ears. Another question on tips for helping people quit gluten. Life without sandwiches and pasta. We go into the psychology, Diane, of this in a few modules, so stick with the class. But just for tonight, right, the number one tip I'll give you tonight is wrap your mind around the idea that you don't need sandwiches, pizza, and pasta. Like, that's really where most people, they have to go through this mourning phase with their food. Mourning, not like good morning, but mourning as in sadness, as in loss. And so they go through a mourning period, and once you get through that mourning period, if you've ever studied the phases of grief, the last phase of grief is acceptance. And so what happens to many people when they're new in the gluten-free diet is they're kind of bouncing back between anger and denial and bargaining, and they never fully get to acceptance. And so it's really hard for them to wrap their brain around actually being grain-free. And so that's something but it's a journey all of us have to go through when we're going through that transition with our diet. Kit is asking, would restless leg and body movements be part of a gluten syndrome? It can be, yeah, very much so. One of the things that causes restless legs, there's actually 2 nutrient deficiencies that can cause restless leg syndrome that are linked to gluten directly. So we're talking about restless leg syndrome, RLS, right? We've got iron and we've got folate. So deficiencies, low levels of iron and low levels of folate can cause RLS or restless leg. Now, this is where gluten comes in because gluten actually damages the GI tract. We'll talk about this more in Module 7, but it can lead to iron deficiency and folate deficiency. So the nutritional deficit caused by gluten exposure can actually lead to the RLS. And so a lot of times what people will find is when they go gluten-free and their GI tract heals, they start absorbing folate and iron better, those symptoms start to subside. Now, in some cases, we have to supplement, and I see this all the time clinically, is where the gluten-induced damage is decades in the making, and so changing the diet doesn't necessarily rebound those nutritional deficiencies as quick as we would like. In that case, testing and supplementation can go a long way to improving restless legs. Let's see here. Helen, does the genetic test differentiate between the different subsets of gluten, or does it just measure gluten in general? So what it does is it measures, so understand, the genetic testing is not going to say this, you're reacting to wheat, or you're just reacting to barley, or you're just reacting to rye. Because what we're measuring is something called HLA-DQ genes. And so the way that works is, this is a cell. So if you got a cell right here, this is an immune cell, okay? The DNA in the center, right? And on chromosome 6 within your DNA, it codes for this antenna. This antenna is called an HLA-DQ receptor. And so this is one of the primary immune receptors on the surface of your immune cells, and its job is to identify good from bad. So it helps the body determine what's evil versus what's friendly. And so what happens in people with HLA-DQ positive gene patterns, when gluten, and it doesn't matter, corn, rice, wheat, barley, rye, oats, when gluten comes into contact with that receptor, that immune cell picks it up and presents it to something called an APC, or an antigen-presenting cell. And so it presents it to this other cell, and then that other cell generates an inflammatory response. There are different kinds of inflammatory responses that it will generate. One of them is through the production of antibodies, but another one is through the production of cytokines or inflammatory chemicals. So if you have a gene pattern that's positive, doesn't matter what grain you're eating, this is what happens, is you get antigen presenting to this APC, you get gluten antigen presentation to that APC, and you get an inflammatory response. And so in that regard, the more gluten you eat, if you're genetically sensitive, the more you eat, the more low-grade levels of inflammation you perpetuate. And so remember, inflammation is not, it doesn't kill you today. Like inflammation, it's inflammation over time. It's chronic inflammation over time that slowly erodes your systems and erodes your body's resources and health. And this is why a lot of times people have different symptoms associated with gluten exposure. Not everybody has or develops celiac disease. Many people develop other forms of gluten-induced damage because inflammation and the inflammatory response affects different people in different areas in different ways. But generally speaking, the genetic testing that I've been talking about today, it measures whether or not you have the genetic propensity to react to glutens as a family of glutens. So it's not specific for wheat only or for corn only, but it's specific for the entire family. Okay. Let's see here. How much time does it take for gluten to leave fully the body after you stop eating it? So I think it's not how much time does it take for gluten to leave the body so much as it is how much time does it take for you to heal from the inflammation, okay? Because gluten is going to leave the body relatively quick, but that long-term inflammatory response lasts a little bit longer. So this right here, 2 months. A lot of research studies show, this is why on food labels in the USA, we have, FDA has a labeling law, which is the 20 ppm or 20 parts per million law or rule, and that a food to be labeled gluten-free has to be under 20 parts per million of gluten, meaning it can't contain more than that. And most really true gluten-free foods don't have any parts per million, but this is what the FDA says is gluten-free. And the reason why is if it's above 20 parts per million, you can get inflammation for up to 2 months. And that's why if you're going on a gluten-free diet and you're expecting to feel better tomorrow or next week, a lot of times you won't, because that inflammation and that inflammatory process is still going along, and it tapers, but it doesn't just go away after one day of being on a gluten-free diet. Can gluten cause acid reflux? Absolutely it can. That's actually one of the major symptoms, Hunter, of gluten exposure is acid reflux. Okay, I think I answered that one already. How much time I think I answered that one. So again, how much time does it take for gluten to stop damaging? About 2 months. Is it safe to take high-dose probiotics while pregnant and breastfeeding? I've been taking a pregnancy specific probiotic, but it's only 22 billion CFU in broad spectrum or targeted strains. So I guess the general question there from Crawford is it okay to take high doses of probiotics during pregnancy? Yeah, probiotics are very safe, and there have been a number of research studies, both in non-pregnant and in pregnant women, that dictate that they're very safe. I mean, do you want to take mega doses of it, or do you want to go take trillions of colony-forming units of probiotics? No, that level hasn't really been studied. But if you're in that 22 billion range, you're perfectly fine. 22 billion, in my opinion, is not even actually high dose. It's actually quite low. When you look at the spectrum of how many bacteria actually live inside of your GI tract. Let's see, Angeline is asking, what do you suggest to take before and after taking, oh gosh, this is not, we're not going there, folks. We're not going on the topic of the virus tonight. We can do that on a different night. I will just say this: if you have an autoimmune condition, you need to talk with your doctor, and you need to have a very in-depth conversation with your doctor, because the one subset of people that don't do well with that are people with a pre-existing autoimmune disease. And so if you're gluten sensitive and you're just finding out and you're trying to overcome autoimmune disease and they're trying to mandate this to you, you need to have a conversation with your doctor and get a medical exemption. And no ifs, ands, or buts. You need to have that conversation. Any recommendations for probiotics for known gluten sensitivity? Yes, Diane. We have we have to actually produce a number of different types, and we can throw that up in the feed for you. But probably just for basic daily use to recover from gluten sensitivity, Biotic Defense is my favorite. If you know that you struggle with yeast overgrowth, we have one called Biotic Defense with Espelarti that would be a good option for you. Let's see. Melissa's asking, where can I find the modules to which you're referring? I'm very invested in feeling better. So you must be joining us without having gone through the class yet. So Melissa, we're in the middle of a master class, so we're going to put a link up in the feed where you can go and register. Once you register, you can start watching these modules. It's free of charge for you to watch. Are nut and seed flours good to use for gluten-free flours? They can be, Sue, but one of the issues with nut and seed flours, if you're just getting started in the gluten-free diet, and more specifically for seeds, not for nuts, but seeds can be difficult to digest and break down, and they also contain different proteins, non-gluten proteins, and some of these proteins can shut down digestion. So they contain anti-digestive proteins, we'll just say it like that. And so don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean don't ever eat seeds and you can never eat seeds again. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is many of you are going gluten-free for the first time and your guts are a mess and you have very poor digestion and you suffer a lot with, constipation, indigestion, heartburn or acid reflux, inflammation. And so what's happening is your gut is broken, right? It's compromised from the years of gluten exposure. And so if you just do everything with seeds, you just say, okay, I'm not going to eat gluten anymore, but I'm going to eat all the seed stuff. Well, your gut's broken. And so you're eating all these seeds that are difficult to digest, difficult to break down, contain anti-nutritive proteins that alter digestion. Then you might be stuck by trying to incorporate seeds as a staple food into your diet before your GI tract heals. So remember, the name of the game with avoidance of gluten is you want your gut to heal, because once your gut heals, you become more resistant to this type of thing, and your GI tract becomes more resilient and more capable and more able to digest foods and to break foods down. So for some people looking at introduction of some of these seed flours and other things, you might want to wait 6 months of really being on a strict, true gluten-free diet before you jump into a bunch of these seed-based flours. Again, it's not true for 100% of everyone, but in my experience, a lot of people hit a plateau and they start going backwards as a result of just replacing the gluten-containing flours with the non-gluten-containing flours that are harder to digest, and the seeds are part of that family. Does xanthan gum contain gluten? So xanthan gum is derived from corn, Darlene, and that's one of the reasons why I would suggest that you do your best to avoid eating it. A lot of products use xanthan gum as it's a dough conditioner, a dough agent. They add it to give that similar gluten-like texture, but I see people all the time reacting to it, and it's just not something I recommend that you try to eat when you're going on a true gluten-free diet. So I think a follow-up to Hunter's question earlier, so if I start a gluten-free diet, is there a possibility or a good possibility that my acid reflux will stop? It is a possibility if, Hunter, your acid reflux is being caused by gluten. Remember, gluten can cause acid reflux, but so can other things. And so there's also a type of bacteria called Helicobacter pylori that can cause acid reflux. There are other microorganisms. Yeast overgrowth can cause gastritis, which manifests very similar symptom-wise to acid reflux or GERD. So yeah, it's possible that going gluten-free will help you. I mean, it's free, it's easy to try, you have nothing to lose. But remember, there are other things that can cause acid reflux as well. Can gluten sensitivity cause peripheral neuropathy? We're actually, Kathleen, that's a great question. We're doing a major show on neuropathy coming up here in the next several weeks. And yes, the answer to that question is yes. I've seen this numerous times. I mean, if you go over to Gluten-Free Society, you can type in the search term, just type in neuropathy, and you'll pull lots of different research studies and articles and information on the connection between gluten-induced neuropathy. It's very, very much a connection. And I've seen cases where people, they had back surgeries, they had steroid injections, they had chiropractic care, and their neuropathies wouldn't go away, they quit eating gluten, boom, it goes away within a matter of months, and they're back to normal. So yes, gluten can definitely cause neuropathy. Where is hypermobility or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome on the 100 list? How do you classify it, inflammatory or autoimmune? So it's a mixture of, Ehlers-Danlos is a mixture of autoimmune / genetic, because there's a genetic component to Ehlers-Danlos. But I see a lot of cases of that particular condition where their pain levels improve dramatically when going gluten-free. The hypermobility stays with them, and that doesn't go away, but a lot of their pain clears up once they get their diet cleaned up. So in my opinion, I think what happens a lot of times is people have a bad diet. They also have Ehlers-Danlos. They get the diagnosis, but they don't change their diet, and so they actually connect the Ehlers-Danlos with all of their pain. But in my opinion, when they change their diet, their pain goes away. They still have hypermobility. So I don't think Ehlers-Danlos really is a pain-based syndrome as much as it is a hypermobility issue. And I think diet being not what it should be is where most of these individuals actually have their pain manifest. Now, the other thing with Ehlers-Danlos, if you haven't already worked with a good PT, a good chiropractor who can train you on strengthening your muscles, because the hypermobility can create or predispose you to injury. And so you want to strengthen the muscles to reduce the risk of that hypermobility, causing an injury for you. So definitely you want to work on the strength, the bulk strength of your muscles, because they have to kind of serve as a surrogate to the hypermobile tendons and ligaments in that particular condition. And then I think part 2 to that question was mast cell activation. So understand that all this talk about it, mast cell activation syndrome, in my opinion, mast cell activation syndrome is not a disease. It's a state of symptoms, right? It's your body is basically, your mast cells are being overactivated and you're over releasing histamines, and histamines can cause a lot of itchy and inflammatory response. And so for some people, gluten can definitely induce activation of mast cells, but lots of things can. Vitamin C deficiency can actually contribute to mast cell activation, mold toxicity, yeast overgrowth. So there are a number of different things that can contribute to that series of different problems. But again, cleaning the diet up is the first step. It's in my opinion, it's the first step no matter what your condition is, because you can't get healthy eating food that isn't right for you. And if gluten is playing a role, it doesn't matter what drug you take, what supplement you use, what therapy that you take or partake of, what surgery you do, none of it will work, because none of it's actually addressing the underlying origin of the inflammation. What's driving the inflammation is the most important part. Does oat milk cause the same issue as having regular oats? Yeah, if you're gluten sensitive, stay away from oat milk. That's my opinion. Oats have a type of gluten in them called avenin, so I would avoid oat milk if you know that you're gluten sensitive. Can we buy Warrior bread in Australia? We're working on it, Sherry. We are working on it. You might just reach out to my customer service team. That's Glutenology at Gmail, and just ask them. I know they're working on a solution, so I don't know whether they've come up with one yet or not, but it's certainly worth an email. And just ask for Jessica. So email glutenology at gmail.com and ask for Jessica, and field that question to her. Let's see here. Can I talk about vinegars that are safe in condiments that contain vinegar? Yeah, so the problem with vinegars, most of your condiments with vinegar is they're white vinegar, right? So what is white vinegar made from? White vinegar generally is made from corn, so I don't recommend it. And so a lot of your condiments, this is the primary ingredient, like your mayonnaise and your ketchup and your mustard. So I recommend you look for condiments that contain apple cider or other forms of vinegar. So these are gluten-free, whereas this one contains corn and can be very problematic for people with gluten issues. So that's it in a nutshell. I mean, look for, there's red plum vinegar, although wine vinegars are a little, in my opinion, have a lot of processed nitrates and other preservatives in them, so I tend to want to avoid those. But look for organic vinegar that's not white vinegar, preferably an apple cider vinegar. Now, some people don't like the taste of apple cider vinegar, so like a plum vinegar might be another option as well. Is rice flour okay when it's in supplements? Absolutely not. what did I just say? And I'm not trying to pick on you, but what did I just say about 20 parts per million? Like 20 parts per million is the size of a breadcrumb. So if you have a supplement, and let's say it's packed with rice as an ingredient as a filling agent, that's more than a breadcrumb, and you're getting that gluten exposure. I get this all the time. People come to me from all over the world and they're like, Dr. Osborne, I'm on a gluten-free diet and I still don't feel right. I'm still feeling bad. They'll bring in their supplements. I'll look at them. They've got rice flour in them. 2 weeks after we get those supplements out of their diet, they're starting to feel better. So rice flour in a supplement is not okay. It's a bad idea. Let's see here. I like that. Crypto says, really enjoying your book. Thank you. You're welcome. Glad you're enjoying No Grain, No Pain. It was definitely a project of passion and love. Let's see. Becky's asking if I've had a test done from a particular. I don't like to talk about other companies and their tests. So if you've had a blood test where you identified, there's some tests that they measure different aspects of whether you're reacting to, for example, gliadin or other types of gluten proteins. Do you still need to have a genetic test done? I would say you would want to do a genetic test if you had a negative blood test that shows that you're not gluten sensitive, because most of those blood tests are limited. They're only measuring a handful of different types of gluten. So they're antibody tests. And remember what I said earlier about how we react to gluten. And I'll talk more in depth about this in other modules if you stick with the master class. But this inflammatory response can be antibody in nature. And so a lot of these blood tests that you have doctors run are antibody tests. And it's great if it's positive, it's positive. It's not, so if you get a positive result, great, you can avoid gluten and go on. But if it's negative, if you get a negative antibody response, remember, how else can we make inflammation from gluten exposure? We can get a response that is cytokine in nature. And these lab tests that a lot of these other doctors are running that are claiming to be like highly advanced for measuring gluten responses, they don't include measuring these things. And remember too, there's different antibodies. So there's IgG, there's IgA, there's IgM, there's IgE, there's something called an immune complex response, there's what we call a direct T cell response. So you've got lots of different responses that your immune system can produce when it's exposed to gluten. Genetics helps us understand that. But if you're measuring just 1 or 2 or 3 of these specific responses, but you're not measuring them in your entirety, you might be missing, you might be getting a false negative. And that's why I don't recommend blood testing or serology testing to try to identify whether or not you're reacting to specific different types of glutens. The tests are way too misleading, and they're not comprehensive, and they can lead to false negatives that can send you on the path to the continuance of eating gluten. And that's in my opinion, that's a huge problem for a lot of people. I see it all the time in my practice. People come in, they said, yeah, my other doctor tested me and said I was negative. We do genetic testing, they're positive, they change their diet and then they save their life, or they change their life dramatically. So genetic testing, if you're not sure, genetic testing, and I know I've emphasized that a lot in the master class. It's because that's where it's at. If you want an answer, you get genetic testing done. You get the right genetic test done too. All these SNP tests that you can buy online, those do not measure all of the gene patterns for gluten sensitivity. So again, you're getting misleading information. You're getting information that's partial and not comprehensive, and so it can steer you down the wrong road if it's a false negative. What sweeteners would you recommend with gluten sensitivity? Yeah, so Diana's asking that question. So stevia would be a good sweetener. If you're not reactive to it. Some people don't do well with stevia. It gives them gas and bloating. Monk fruit is a good sweetener. Maple is a good sweetener. As far as a natural sweetener, organic maple, even honey, but you got to make sure it's organic. Now, do I recommend a ton of sweeteners all the time in the diet? No. But if you're looking for something natural to sweeten with, those are some of your better options. I love that. Karen says, your book is invaluable to be read over and over and over. Take notes. I love that. I love hearing that. I love that my book is impacting you in that way. Helen asks, what's the name of your book? It's called No Grain, No Pain. Maybe we'll throw a link up in the feed for you if you want to check that out. And you can get it at the library too. So those of you maybe are on a tighter budget, you can check it out at the library. It's free at the library. You can also buy it from Amazon or Barnes & Noble or any other major book carrier. Let's see. Let's go down on the right and then... Oh, we went too far. Go back up. I missed one. Keep going. Can you share? Nicole's asking, can you share what other countries use as a benchmark to be labeled gluten-free, specifically England, Italy, and Canada? I don't want to speak as the expert in those countries, to be honest with you, because I don't want to give you wrong information, but I believe it's 5 parts per million, not 20. So in the US it's 20, but I believe a lot of your European countries have a stricter standard, which is 5 parts per million. I can tell you what I do with all of our products is first of all, we don't manufacture anything at all with any gluten in it anyway. But for the sake of testing, we test to the sensitivity of 5 parts per million. But legally in the U.S., the legal requirement is 20 parts per million, and I believe the requirement in Europe is 5 parts per million. But again, please don't quote me on that because I don't want to misspeak and be wrong for you. But I think that's accurate. Let's see here. Agnieszka is asking, what are the best flours to use? It depends. A lot of people with gluten sensitivity do really well with the alternative flours like almond flour or coconut flour. There's also cassava or tapioca flour. There's green banana flour. There's chestnut flour. As a matter of fact, I think we have an article on flours. Mel, if you have that available, you can pull that up. We'll post that into the feed, and that's on our Facebook feed, I believe. So, but what you have to be careful of is some of the substitute flours, like for example, tapioca and cassava are high sugar, high carbohydrate. We'll say carb, right? They're high carb. And so if you're struggling with like a diabetic problem, or you're struggling with trying to control your blood sugar, this can be a problem. The other thing about these flours here is like your gluten-free flours, like your wheat, your rice, and your corn, generally those flours are fortified. These ones generally are not. So these are high carbohydrate and they're not fortified with vitamins and minerals. So the more carbs you eat, the more you tax your B vitamin stores and your magnesium stores. So if you use these as massive staples in your diet, you get overabundance of carbohydrate, and that can deplete your B vitamins and your minerals like magnesium. So you've got to be careful. Don't use these as primary staples. I mean, if you're using a blend and you're using them occasionally to have that occasional indulgence, I'm not going to fault you for that. But if you're using tapioca and you're baking every bread every night and you're doing pasta and pizza and everything just made from this stuff, you're going to cause a lot of vitamin and mineral deficiencies from excessive carbohydrates. So just be cautious with the use of those. Now, almond flour, as I mentioned, almond's okay. But a lot of people who have pain and inflammation, almond flour is high omega-6. And so remember that too much omega-6 can drive inflammation. And so if you're struggling with joint pain or inflammation, muscle pain, etc., it might be a good idea to be cautious with this one. So again, just words of caution. They definitely are grain-free and gluten-free, but again, what I don't want you to do is just go buy a bunch of almond flour, make everything with almond flour, and you just overload your body with omega-6 and you drive up your inflammatory levels and you start hurting and you're like, this gluten-free diet is no better than the gluten-containing diet because of this reason, right? And that has nothing to do with gluten, but it just has to do with the nutritional density and content of some of these other flours. Can you get a false negative with the genetic test? No false negatives. Genetic is accurate. Genetic testing is accurate to the 99.99 infinity percentile. So you can't get a false negative. I love that. Sue says, you saved my son. Thank you from my heart. Well, right back to you, Sue. Thank you for sharing that. If I've had any effect and impact on helping your son in that way, I'm honored and privileged to be a part of that journey for him. Karen says, my GI doctor diagnosed me with celiac. Do I need any further tests? No, you don't. I mean, it's just more than that. If you want to get further testing, you can, but you don't need it. If you're celiac, you're gluten sensitive, and so you need to be on a true gluten-free diet. Remember what I said in the other modules. 92% of people following a traditional gluten-free diet fail to exhibit healing of their villus atrophy. And this is a 5-year study done on celiac patients. So this is why we're having this class, because the GI doctors that make the diagnosis don't have the nutritional follow-up with those patients. They generally make the diagnosis, say, you need to go gluten-free, go learn about it, and then you're off on your own, right? And that's, again, this is why this is a resource for you that you can use and share and take away. If a child has a grandmother with systemic lupus, celiac disease, and dairy sensitivity, is it worth putting the child on a gluten-free and casein-free diet without genetic testing first? It's perfectly fine to do that. My thought on it is simply as this. If you're going to justify that type of diet change, and your whole family's not already doing it, so you're just going to isolate this child and make this child avoid eating those things, but you're eating those things, and your husband is eating those things, and that child's siblings are eating those things, that's a bad idea, because you're going to socially isolate that child. So, you know, and again, that may not be your situation, but I'm just trying to make a point here, and that is, it's not a bad idea to take somebody gluten and dairy free if you suspect that they have that autoimmunity or a potential to develop autoimmunity if they don't. But if by doing so you're going to isolate that child, and that child really doesn't know if that's the right thing, then as that child grows up, that child will grow up with resentment and rebellion in its heart, and they'll rebel back against that diet. So if there was never any initial justification as to why are you taking that person on that diet, that child, to me, it's always important to have the data. Is that person needed to have that type of diet for the rest of their life? Because you're talking about lifelong diet change that's completely against the grain, pun intended, against the grain of society. And look, some people grow up and they're against the grain of society. Like, they're rebels, they're free thinkers, they're different, they don't follow a herd mentality, and that works for them. But others, they need society around them a lot more. And so if you give them a task that may not be necessary for them, and it also isolates them, and that doesn't fit their personality well, you could be doing some psychological harm. So point is, if you're in doubt, test. If you're not in doubt, there's no harm in doing the diet, but if you're in doubt, test, especially if you're going to justify the lifelong change in somebody's diet like that. Doc, your videos and classes have helped and given me the knowledge and confidence to pursue nutrition coach certification. Thank you. Awesome. So look, man, we're reaching 100 million people, right? That's the mission. Save 100 million lives. If I've encouraged you to become a health coach, if I've encouraged you to go to medical school or to go on to train in nutrition so that you can touch lives too in your career, in your profession, that's what it's all about. It's about sharing and helping other people. Let's see here. Sandy's asking about biotic force versus biotic defense. These are probiotics. Explain the difference and when to use each. So biotic force is more designed, it's a spore probiotic, and it's more designed for people who react poorly to standard probiotics. So like if you're a histamine intolerant individual, a lot of times you take like Lactobacillus or Bifidobacter, you get itchy, you get gas, you get bloated, you might break out in a hive. That's not a good fit for you. So biotic force is designed for people like with SIBO or people that have a hard time tolerating your traditional Lactobacillus and Bifidobacter species. Is L-glutamine good for leaky gut? Yeah, it can be. Absolutely can be. We actually test people for L-glutamine deficiency, but as a general rule of thumb, what L-glutamine is it's an amino acid. And it is the primary source of fuel, or it's the primary fuel source for the enterocytes. The enterocytes are the cells of your small intestine. So your small intestine cells require L-glutamine to make energy so they can heal, repair, and replicate and keep that barrier sealed. So that's why L-glutamine can be so helpful. Should we stay away from lentils, beans, etc. as well? Maybe. So if you're reading No Grain, No Pain, phase 2 of the diet is we do avoid lentils and we do avoid beans. We avoid them because many people, again, after years of gluten-induced damage, don't have the digestive capacity to be able to break down lentils, beans, and other legumes. And so we do a temporary avoidance. Now, is it a permanent, lifelong avoidance? Sometimes it is. It depends on the person, and sometimes it's not. But the answer to that question is possibly. If you're new to it all, yeah, you definitely want to do it for that first 6 months or so. But after that, you may try to reintroduce them slowly. And when you reintroduce them, make sure that you're preparing them properly, where you soak them and you let them sprout, and you use a pressure cooker to cook them. And that way, you pre-digest them with all that pressure and heat. You make them easier for your GI tract to break down and to digest and get access to the nutrients. Okay, I think I answered that one. Are nuts and seeds that are cross-contaminated still a problem with gluten if washed properly and hydrated? Look, if they're, I wouldn't use them. Like if I'm using nuts for the most part, unless I know they're certified gluten-free and like, you know, for example, like we make Warrior bread and we use almond flour. We use an organic almond flour. We crack the shell. We know it's not cross-contaminated because we're not producing other things in that facility that are from grains. But if you don't know, then my answer is don't eat it if you're not sure, if you can't confirm. But the other thing is, if you're going to eat nuts too, buy them in the shell. When you buy them in the shell, there's no risk of cross-contamination. So, you know, best time to buy nuts in a shell is around the holidays, right? And when they have the big bags of, you know, Brazil nuts and hazelnuts and walnuts, etc. So it's a great time. Actually, we're coming up next month or so. We're coming up where you're going to have access to a lot of that. Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that omega-6 in the almond flour is omega-6 also high in almond milk. Yeah, it can be. And so again, you just got to be careful. Again, I'm not saying you can't use it. I'm just saying don't like drink a gallon a day and then bake everything with almond flour as well, and then eat almonds and then have almond butter instead of peanut butter. Like that's where you get into trouble, is when you start, you know, bathing in this stuff. As far as coconut flour usage, you know, it's to tolerance. Coconut flour is not rich in omega-6, so there's not an omega-6, omega-3 disruption that you have to worry about there. Eric says, I drink a lot of clean filtered water but still feel dehydrated. I also take Adderall, so might these cause some of that? Yeah, Adderall is a stimulant. It definitely can cause dehydration. It can cause B vitamin deficiency. So Adderall might be playing a role in that. One of the other things you might try, Eric, is we have a product called Ultra Electrolytes, and you can add that to your water. It just adds a number of different electrolytes and mineral salts that might help with your hydration a little bit better. So Diane says, learning I was gluten sensitive led me to becoming a health coach. Hardest to work with is families with children. What are some of your favorite treat suggestions? So like treats as in like tasty things for kids. Gosh, we've got a lot of different recipes on Gluten-Free Society. If you go there, there's a recipe tab right at front and center on the home page, glutenfreesociety.org. And several of those are good treat recipes, but some of my favorite are just taking fresh fruit and pureeing it and freezing it like a sorbet. Kids generally like that quite a bit, especially if you mix in different types of fruit. So like, you know, kids' taste buds are so unique and different, and so you might have some kids that like the strawberry is tart. Maybe they're not fully ripe and they're a little bit tart, so you can add a little bit of peach and puree a little bit of peach, because generally peach is a little bit sweeter. So, you know, mix and matching different fruits and creating a sorbet is a great place to start, where you can get a real treat without added sugar. Good resources for nuts. I mean, your local Whole Foods or natural grocers would be a good source. A lot of times you can purchase them again in the shell. That's really the best. I mean, there are some online stores that sell nuts. I think Nuts Online, I don't buy them personally from there, so I can't vouch for their purity or for their organic, whether they're organic or not, but you might look, and use it as a resource. I do know of another resource where you can buy nuts in the bag, and that's a place called Azure Standard, and that's AZURE standard.com, and they're a co-op from Oregon. They're an organic co-op, and they deliver all over the country. They have drop sites, so you might check those guys out. Other than that, support your local farmers in your area. Like I do, I have 37 pecan trees, and so we do a pecan harvest every year, and usually we give them away at Christmas time. But support those farmers who are growing those things and doing it right, because when you spend your money with that farmer doing it right, you're taking away that same dollar from a company who's not doing it right. And so put your money where your will of the future of the way you would like to see the world be. Are pecans good nuts to eat? Yeah, they're great. It's not a silly question. I mean, there's no silly questions here. We're here to learn. Pecans are great. Where pecans can be problematic is if you don't like them, or if you're just generally more allergic to tree nuts, and some people are. But if you're not, they're great. They're actually, what I like to do with pecans every year is crack a lot of them and crush them, grind them down into a pecan butter, and then put a little bit of organic maple syrup in that, and you've got like a really nice, this is going back to treats for kids, that's like a really great treat for kiddos when you're trying to find substitutes in that regard. I'm taking antibiotics for my ear infection. My question is, should I take probiotics, prebiotics with the antibiotics or after? So Linda, that's a great question. If you're on an antibiotic currently, you want to have a 4-hour time gap between the antibiotic and the probiotic. You should take the probiotic with the antibiotic, just not at the same exact time. So give yourself, you took the antibiotic at 8 in the morning, take your probiotic at noon. So the key with that is take your probiotics while you're on the antibiotic, because what you're doing is you're trying to populate your gut with healthy microorganisms at the same time you're trying to kill off the infection. And then you want to take it for 2 to 4 weeks after you stop the antibiotic. And I know that's kind of a long time span, but 2 to 4 weeks. 1, it depends on the state of your microbiome. 2, it depends on the strength of the antibiotic and the length of time that you're being prescribed the antibiotic. So 2 to 4 weeks is a pretty good window to take that antibiotic as you're tapering out that probiotic as you're getting off of that antibiotic. Is it safe to take L-glutamine for a long time? In general, yes. I would say don't megadose L-glutamine just because. It's just, it may not be necessary, but there's no research or major studies that show, gosh, that's just a dangerous thing. I think there have been some very weak and very poorly done studies on L-glutamine and long-term usage in cancer, but I wouldn't hold water to those studies because they really were done poorly, and they really, in my opinion, they're not really great evidence that glutamine is dangerous. Let's see, keep going down on that left side. So as far as insomnia is concerned, we've done, Rajendra, we've done a number of bits, if you will. Go check out our archives. If you go to our YouTube channel, subscribe, we have an archive. Just type in sleep problems or insomnia, and I think we've got like a whole entire hour and a half where we go into that in a lot more detail. So Cheryl says, ozone can help with CRP and leaky gut, right? What are your favorite anti-inflammatories? So yeah, I mean, ozone can be helpful, but it's not, it doesn't resolve it. So understand that when you're trying to, CRP, by the way, those of you that don't know, CRP stands for C-reactive protein, and it's a blood marker. It's a protein produced by your liver when you're inflamed. So it's a marker that doctors will measure to try to track your inflammation and see where it's at, if it's coming down. You can use therapies like ozone. You can use other therapies like turmeric and high doses of omega-3 and vitamin C and quercetin and other herbals that are anti-inflammatory. I mean, boswellia is a great anti-inflammatory. White willow is a great anti-inflammatory. But if you're using anti-inflammatories, it's very important that you use them in the short term for kind of the temporary benefit, but in the long term, you're finding out why the inflammation is present. Like, I can't overemphasize that enough, because what a lot of people do is they take anti-inflammatories and think their problem is solved. And that's the biggest mistake you can make, because when you mask your body's alarm systems then your body has no way to warn you that what you're doing is actually damaging to you. And so anti-inflammatories, even herbal ones, even natural ones, can be very powerful and can mask that. So again, use them in the short term, but you should not try to use them to mitigate or manage your inflammation long term. Would fulvic acid or serrapeptase help to break down the gluten proteins? Not so much. Serrapeptase is better. Its use is better for like biofilms in the GI tract. So it's really good at it helps to cleave proteins in the blood, and it can actually help keep the blood nice, the viscosity of the blood nice and thin. But it's also one of those that we know can help break down biofilms in the GI tract that are produced by microorganisms like bacteria and fungal overgrowths. But not so much for gluten digestion. I mean, the big thing for gluten digestion is protease, particularly peptidyl peptidase, which is an enzyme that's been shown to stop, to help break down gluten. So if you're eating out or traveling, like that enzyme's a great type of enzyme to take to protect you just in case you get cross-contamination. You don't want to take it so that you can try to eat gluten. Like, remember that too. Like, a lot of people say, well, I'm going to take my gluten enzyme so I can go eat pizza or pasta. That's a terrible idea. And any company that sells you an enzyme under that umbrella, saying you can eat your gluten, you can have your cake and eat it too, right? Just take this enzyme. They're unethical, they're immoral, they should be shut down. Don't buy their products, because that's false information. That's not the way those enzymes are designed to work. They don't give you full protection. They help mitigate the potential of cross-contamination. So they're not designed, to allow you to eat a Subway sandwich. So keep that in mind. That's kind of an in-depth question. Let me look at this other one here. Any suggestions for healing the gut? I'm already gluten-free, dairy-free, nut-free, and grain-free, but still struggle with Hashimoto's, celiac, and POTS. Yeah, I mean, if you're that free in your diet, meaning you're free of all those foods and you're still struggling, super important. And we get into this in Module 10, but I'll touch on it just a little bit tonight because the question came up. You've got to get help. You're past that point where it's do-it-yourself mode and you're trying to figure this out on your own. You've got to work with somebody who's skilled in functional medicine. So you got to find you a good functional practitioner, and you want to look at four categories of things. So the four that you need to have looked at: you need to have your food investigated, because you may be reacting to other foods that you're just not avoiding. This is very uncommon when you've been gluten sensitive your whole life and you start collecting food allergies. Like, the gluten damages your GI tract, it overstimulates your immune system, and so you can become more and more reactive to different foods. So getting the right type of testing, and what I would suggest is don't do an IgG test for food. You can buy these tests online now where they do the home prick of your finger. These tests are highly inaccurate and misleading, and they're junk. You're wasting your money. Don't do that. So you want to test. This is why you want to work with a functional doc that knows what they're talking about. So you want food. You want to measure for any kind of environmental, chemical exposures or chemical impact. So for example here, depending on your age, if you're my age, you grew up at a time where lead was in the paint, lead was in gasoline, lead was in the pipes in your home. And so a lot of you bioaccumulated lead, and lead is a trigger for autoimmune disease. Lead toxicity can actually interfere with thyroid hormone function. So chemicals are important to look at, including pesticides like glyphosate and other chemicals. So having a doctor measure these, and then you also want to look at your microbiome. And I will say the same thing. These companies that are offering these online tests to measure your microbiome, they're junk. It's junk. Don't buy into it. They use the same thing for the virus that we're seeing, which is this PCR testing, which is highly inaccurate and it's non-diagnostic. And a lot of these labs that are measuring your microbiome are using the same technology, PCR testing, and it's very misleading. The results are very misleading. So I don't recommend them as a tool. Get with a doctor who can measure this accurately for you. And then, so that's the third thing. And then the fourth thing is you need to get a nutritional evaluation. So you need to be measured for nutritional deficiencies. So these four things, like These 4 things are the most critical. They're the most fundamental. If you're still struggling, but you've gone gluten-free, dairy-free, grain-free, nut-free, etc., soy-free, GMO-free, that needs to be measured. Don't keep trying to do it yourself, because you're missing something that you're not going to find on your own, because it's too nuanced. I mean, you can have a delayed food sensitivity, for example, that's not obvious. So when you eat it, it's not like, oh, I eat it and I feel bad today. It's you eat it and it just continues to trigger low levels of inflammation that keep you in a disease state. And so it's important that you understand. That's why you want to measure these and nuance that out. Okay, so can I repeat the name of the enzyme? So if you're talking about the enzyme that helps to break down gluten from cross-contamination, it's called peptidopeptidase. And if you're looking for a really good one, is one called Gluten Shield that I recommend that contains that enzyme. See, my mom is 87 and shows some signs of dementia. She also has somewhat elevated CRP. For the rest, she is in great condition. Could serrapeptidase make sense for her? Possibly. It depends. So like if she's on other blood thinners, you got to be careful if somebody's taking other blood thinners when you're using proteolytic enzymes and things like ginkgo or high dose omega fish oil, because those can all thin the blood. They can all keep the blood viscosity much thinner, which helps circulation, because when your blood is more fluidic, it can get better access to your brain. It can deliver deeper nutrition to the blood vessels in your brain. But if they're on blood thinners, you can over-deliver blood thinness, and then you can get little tiny leakages in the blood vessel, and so that's not good either. So again, it just depends on whether or not she's on any other types of medications. I have found in my practice the fungal infection is the underlying problem. That's just Kathy weighing in. So yeah, I mean, it's very common. When we get into Module 8, we talk about fungal yeast overgrowth, mimic, and gluten sensitivity as well, so stay tuned for that. Gluten is... So, okay, gluten is a grain protein. How then does it get inside meat of fish that's grain-fed? It doesn't. If you're eating fish that's grain-fed, you're not getting exposure to gluten. That's not how that works. Same thing with cows, same things with any other type of animal flesh. If you're eating an animal flesh where they were feeding the animal grain, you're not getting gluten from the grain. What's happening though, animals, the vast majority of animals, including cows, are not designed to eat grain. At least not in the quantities that they're feeding them. And so what happens is you feed massive quantities of grain to fish, cattle, chicken, right? And what are most of these grains? They're wheat. A lot of it is soy meal too, so it's not just grain, but it's wheat, soy meal. A lot of it's corn. And all of this, for the most part, is GMO. Wheat's not GMO, but corn and soy are. Wheat is hybridized, so it's not technically genetically modified, but it's sprayed. All of these are also sprayed with glyphosate. And so now you're poisoning these animals with glyphosate. You're giving them food that they were not genetically designed to consume. And what happens is you alter the fat content of their meat. So for example, if you take a grass-fed cow and you compare it to a grain-fed cow and you measure the quantity of vitamin E and the quantity of vitamin A and the quantity of omega-3, a grain-fed cow doesn't hold any weight to a grass-fed cow because the nutritional density is wrong. It's off. So what you're doing is you're eating a meat that's contaminated with a poison that you've changed the nutrient ratio of the meat to favor malnutrition, and that's why it's not good for you. So you can't, remember the cardinal rule of nutrition, you can't get healthy eating food that's not healthy. So just because these things are grain-fed doesn't mean that they have gluten in them, but because they are grain-fed, it means they're not good for you. And that one of the other issues with grains in farming, and this is a huge issue, is mycotoxin exposure, because a lot of these grains, the soy, etc., they start storing and accumulating mycotoxin, and this kills people. Mycotoxins are used to produce chemicals that we use to make bombs with in warfare. Like, we don't want that. We don't want to eat mycotoxins from our food. That's a bad idea. So in the US especially, we don't have really rigid or restrictive mycotoxin testing measures for our food and for our animals' food. So, but it's a problem in farming where the mold contaminates the grain, and the grain becomes a harbor for mycotoxins that, remember, mycotoxins, when the animal eats it, gets into the animal's tissue, and now you're eating the animal's tissue. So it's not a gluten issue there, it's a health issue. Let's go down just a little if we, okay. Do we have any other on any, I think, do we have any last ones on that other feed? Okay, awesome. So, I mean, I didn't answer all the questions, but guys, I know you're all interested in talking about the virus, because a lot of you are asking that question. It's just not what we're talking about tonight. I don't want to contaminate this conversation with that. We'll talk about that another night. Make sure you subscribe, and we'll come back and ask those questions. But hey, look, thanks for spending your evening with me. Thanks for participating in the Glutenology Masterclass. I hope you've enjoyed modules 1 through 4. If you're just coming into this and you haven't watched them, make sure you sign up. We can put that link up for you to make sure that you sign up for the Masterclass. It's going on through the weekend, and so you have this wonderful opportunity to get educated. And I promise you, I swear to you, you will not watch this class. If you think you know everything there is to know about gluten, you're going to learn. I promise you. That is my promise to you. If you don't learn, call me, and I will refund the cost of the course, even if you didn't buy it, to you, because I know you will learn. I know you will learn far above and beyond what you think you know about gluten. Remember, we got to get this information out there, because people literally are dying every day, every week, every month as a result of not having it. So that's the last thing. Help me share this. Hit that share button. Copy that URL and send it to a friend or a loved one or a family member who needs this information, and let's get the word out so that we can help save 100 million lives. This is Dr. Osborne wishing you a fantastic evening. We'll see you next time for our next live Q&A in the Glutenology, and I'll see you on the other side in the Masterclass. Take care. Hey, don't forget to tune in next week, same time, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, for another Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain show. Bring all your toughest health questions to me. I look forward to answering them. And before you leave today, make sure you hit subscribe. And once you do, click that bell. That bell is going to allow us to remind you right before we go live. But it's also going to allow us to remind you when we come out with other video content all week long. We've got lots of episodes coming your way all week long, and I don't want you to miss anything. So again, subscribe, hit that bell so that you can get notified when we have that new information put up for you. Thanks so much, and I'm wishing you excellent health. Have a great week. We'll see you next Monday night.